A young girl vanished in 1986 after leaving home on her roller skates, headed for a friend's house she never reached. Her parents only realized she was missing when that friend called, wondering if she was still on her way. By then, it was already too late. She had disappeared without a trace. 20 years later, her parents wandered through some local market, unaware that a single moment was about to send a chill down Robert Whitmore's spine. The late afternoon sun, warm and hazy, streamed through the thick canopy of old firs and maples lining the streets of Fern Creek, Oregon. It was 2 o'clock, and the town's perfectly preserved historic center was alive with the gentle energy of its weekend market. Wooden stalls overflowed with local crafts, artisanal cheeses, and the vivid colors of freshly picked berries, painting a postcard scene of small-town charm. But Robert saw no charm in it at all. He walked a few paces behind his wife, Helen, his brow knotted, the familiar weight of discontent pressing heavily on his shoulders. "I still don't see why we had to come all the way out here, Helen," he muttered, his voice low enough to avoid reaching the cheerful vendors, yet sharp enough that Helen caught every word. 3 days. 3 days in the middle of nowhere, looking at jam. Helen paused beside a stall displaying hand-thrown pottery, her fingertips tracing the rim of a sky-blue bowl. Her sigh was soft, a tired patience, worn but not yet broken. "Robert, please, we've talked about this. It's a vacation, our first in a long time. Fern Creek is beautiful. Try to enjoy it, if only a little." It had taken years, gentle persuasion, quiet pleas, and tear-filled conversations in the dark, for Helen to convince Robert to take this trip. Their home in Rockford, Illinois had become a mausoleum of memories, every room echoing with the absence of their daughter, Emily Grace Whitmore. Emily, their bright, spirited 12-year-old, had vanished 2 decades earlier while skating toward a friend's house on a sunny afternoon, swallowed by the ordinary, leaving behind an endless abyss of questions and grief. Since that devastating day in 1986, Robert had built an unyielding shell around himself. Joy became a forgotten language, pleasure a betrayal. He worked, ate, slept, but he did not live. Each day was a monotony of searching and wondering, replaying those last moments over and over in his mind. Helen bore the same crushing weight, but in the past year, something fragile within her had begun to shift. The raw agony had softened, replaced by a quiet realization. They could not remain suspended forever in that void. Emily would not have wanted that. Tentatively, she began suggesting they find a way to move forward, to breathe again, even if that breath always carried the scent of sorrow. This trip to Oregon, far from the ghosts of their past, was her desperate attempt to lead Robert back toward the light, or at least away from the deepest shadows. And then, as they strolled further along Main Street, Robert's gaze, usually fixed on the pavement or lost in the distance, caught on a storefront across the road. It was an unassuming little place, its green paint faded, with a sign above the door that read, "Timber Treasures," in whimsical gold letters, the edges flaking with age. The display windows were crammed with a chaotic array of things: tarnished silver, piles of old books, a chipped porcelain doll, and what looked like a collection of oddly shaped tools. This was unmistakably an antique shop, the kind that seemed to hoard forgotten stories. Helen's eyes lit up. "Oh, look, Robert, that place seems interesting. You know how much I love vintage things. It reminds me of when we were younger." She pointed toward it with a hopeful smile. "Let's go in, just for a moment." Robert's expression didn't change. "Go ahead. I'll wait outside. All that dust and clutter, it's not for me." His hand went to his pocket, finding the comfort of his cigarette pack and lighter. Helen's smile faltered ever so slightly, but she nodded. All right, I won't be long. She crossed the street, her steps light, and disappeared through the door of Timber Treasures. The small bell above it jingled softly. Robert leaned against a lamppost, a cigarette halfway to his lips. He was about to strike the lighter when his eyes, wandering without focus, drifted toward the dusty window. His hand stopped, his breath caught. There, nestled among faded glass jars and the torso of a headless mannequin, sitting on a rough wooden shelf, was a pair of roller skates, pink and blue. Worn, battered, the plastic dulled with age, clearly made for a child. He blinked, convinced his mind was playing tricks, dredging up ghosts from the depths of his grief. But the image remained. Slowly he lowered his hand, forgetting the unlit cigarette. He stepped away from the lamppost, one hesitant step, then another, until his face was nearly pressed against the grimy glass. They were unmistakably familiar. That exact shade of bubblegum pink on the boot, the vivid turquoise of the frame and wheels, the thick purple straps. A wave of dizziness washed over him. Emily. Emily had had a pair just like that. No, not just like that. Those, he'd bought them for her 12th birthday. He could still see her eyes lighting up, the sheer, unfiltered joy as she strapped them on, wobbling at first, then gliding effortlessly, a blur of color and laughter. The cigarette and lighter rattled softly in his pocket. He didn't think. He reacted. He shoved open the shop door, the bell clanging wildly, and strode inside, scanning the dim interior until his eyes landed on a thin-haired man with a worn expression behind a cluttered counter. Helen, who had been examining a display of antique radios toward the back, turned in surprise at his abrupt entrance. "Robert, what's going on? Are you all right?" She hurried toward him. Concern etched into her features. Robert ignored her, his focus locked on the shopkeeper. "The skates," he said hoarsely, urgent. "In the window. I need to see them now." The shopkeeper frowned at his abrupt tone, but began moving toward the display. Helen's voice followed them. "What's happening?" she asked, bewildered. "Look," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. The shopkeeper returned, setting a pair of skates on the counter. Helen's hand flew to her mouth the instant she saw them. "Robert," she breathed. "They look so much like Emily's," Robert finished, reaching out with trembling hands. He turned one of the skates over, inspecting every detail. "Size 4. That's the size I bought her." Helen shook her head, laying a gentle but firm hand on his arm. "Robert, please, don't do this to yourself. There must be thousands of pairs like these. It's just a coincidence." But Robert wasn't listening. He flipped the skate over and examined its underside. There, etched into the plastic toe guard, were 3 small letters. EGW. "Emily Grace Whitmore," he whispered, voice cracking. "I carved these myself, Helen. These are hers. These are Emily's skates." Helen's skepticism dissolved as her gaze fell on the initials. She reached out, her fingertip tracing each letter, her hand trembling. "How is this possible?" she murmured. "How did they end up here? Thousands of miles from home." The shopkeeper, who had been listening with growing curiosity, cleared his throat. "Is there a problem?" Robert looked up, his eyes sharp and burning. "These skates belong to our daughter. She disappeared 20 years ago while wearing them. Where did you get them?" The shopkeeper's expression shifted instantly. He reached for the skates. "I'm sorry about your daughter, but these are no longer yours. If you want them, you'll have to pay the price marked." Robert stared at him in disbelief. "You don't understand. These are evidence. Our daughter was taken while wearing them." "I don't care about the story you're telling me," the shopkeeper replied coldly. "All I know is that they're inventory in my shop and they're $45. $45? Robert exclaimed. "That's outrageous. I paid less for them brand new 20 years ago." Inflation, the shopkeeper said with a shrug, and vintage items carry a premium these days. Helen placed a calming hand on Robert's arm. Maybe we should just buy them, Robert. It doesn't matter what they cost. No, he said firmly. They are ours. They were stolen from us, just like our daughter. I am not paying for something that belongs to me. The shopkeeper's face hardened. If you're not going to buy them, I'll have to ask you to leave. When Robert refused to move, the shopkeeper came around the counter trying to usher them toward the door. Robert clutched the skates to his chest, resisting. The commotion caught the attention of people outside, and a uniformed police officer patrolling the market stepped into the store. "What's going on here?" he asked evenly. The shopkeeper jabbed a finger toward Robert. "This man is trying to steal merchandise from my shop." "I'm not stealing anything," Robert protested. "These skates belong to my daughter. She was wearing them when she vanished 20 years ago in Illinois." The officer's brow furrowed with doubt. "Sir, if you have a claim to that property, there are proper legal channels. You can't just take them." "Look," Robert urged, desperately turning the skates around. "See these initials, e.g. Emily Grace Whitmore, my daughter. I carved them myself, and there's a product serial number here that matches the receipt I've kept all these years." The officer leaned in, inspecting the faint letters. His expression shifted slightly as he recognized the weight of what Robert was saying. He took a step back and spoke into his radio, requesting information about a 20-year-old missing person case in Illinois. After a brief exchange, the officer's demeanor shifted entirely. He turned to Robert, a new respect in his eyes. "Mr. Whitmore, I owe you an apology. The station confirms there is indeed an open case matching your description." Then he faced the store clerk. "I need to speak with the owner of this establishment." "I'm just an employee," the clerk replied defensively. "The owner's not here today." "I'll need his contact information," the officer said firmly. The clerk hesitated, then reached under the counter and produced a business card. "This is the owner's information, Victor Manson. But he's not going to be happy about this." The officer pocketed the card. "I'm confiscating these roller skates as potential evidence in an ongoing investigation." He turned to Robert and Helen. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, I'd like you to come down to the station to give a statement." As they stepped out of the store, Robert felt a flicker of hope for the first time in 2 decades. Maybe, just maybe, this was the opportunity they had been waiting for. Robert and Helen followed the police officer to his cruiser parked at the edge of the market. His nameplate read, "Officer Brennan." "I suggest you drive and follow me to the station," Brennan said. "It's not far, just about 10 minutes along Main Street." The Fern Creek police station was a modest brick building, a small American flag fluttering above the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was calm and professional, a stark contrast to the emotional storm building inside Robert. Officer Brennan led them into a small interview room furnished with a table and 4 chairs. The skates were placed at the center, sealed inside a clear evidence bag. "I've contacted the on-duty detective," Brennan explained. "He'll want your full statement. In the meantime, I need to confirm some details." He pulled out a notebook and pen. "Can you describe your daughter as she was when she disappeared?" Robert cleared his throat. "Emily was 12, shoulder-length auburn hair, green eyes, tall for her age, about 5'3". She had a small scar on her right forearm from when she fell off our backyard fence at age 7. Brennan nodded, jotting down notes. "And when exactly did she disappear?" "June 15th, 1986, Helen said, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "It was Sunday afternoon around 3 o'clock. She was going to her friend Samantha's house about half a mile away. She wanted to show off her new skates." "She never made it there," Robert added. "We didn't realize anything was wrong until Samantha's mother called around 5 asking if Emily was still coming." The door opened and a man in civilian clothes stepped inside, about 40, graying hair, serious expression. "I'm Detective Marshall," he said, shaking hands with Robert and Helen. "I understand you've found a possible lead in your daughter's disappearance." Robert nodded toward the evidence bag. "Those are Emily's skates. I'm sure of it." Marshall sat down across from them. "I've contacted authorities in Illinois. They're sending the case files, but it may take a few hours. In the meantime, I'd like to hear the entire story from you." Over the next hour, Robert and Helen took turns recounting the events surrounding Emily's disappearance. They spoke of the immense search efforts, the volunteer teams combing forests and neighborhoods, the flyers scattered across the state and beyond. "We never stopped looking," Robert said, his voice straining with emotion. "I took a leave from work that first year. We set up a tip line, hired private investigators when the police investigation stalled, but there was never anything solid, nothing at all." Detective Marshall nodded with compassion. "And now, after all this time, her skates turn up in a small Oregon town. That's remarkable. Is there any way to trace how they ended up here?" asked Helen. The store clerk hadn't been much help. "We're working on it," Marshall assured them. "I've sent another officer to dig into the background of the store owner, Victor Manson. We're also visiting the store tomorrow to examine their inventory records." He turned toward the skates, gently removing them from the evidence bag with gloved hands. "These will be photographed and logged. We'll look for fingerprints or trace evidence, though after 20 years it's unlikely we'll find much." As he spoke, another officer entered carrying a folder. Marshall flipped through its contents, his brow furrowing. "Manson bought Timber Treasures 18 years ago," he said. "Before that, he moved around quite a bit. No criminal record, but not much paper trail either." He held up a DMV photo, a man in his 50s, thinning hair, a severe expression. "Do you recognize him?" he asked. Both Robert and Helen shook their heads. "He's due back in town in 2 days," Marshall went on. "We'll bring him in for questioning then." By the time the preliminary work was done, the sun was sinking beyond the station windows. Marshall escorted Robert and Helen to the front. "We'll keep pursuing this lead," he promised. "An officer will revisit the store tomorrow, see if there might be other items connected to your daughter. For now, try to rest." Stepping out into the fading light, Robert felt a strange blend of hope and fear. The skates were real, tangible proof that somewhere, somehow, there might be answers about Emily. But after all these years, the nature of those answers frightened him more than he cared to admit. The sunset washed the sky in orange and pink as Robert and Helen made their way back toward the market. Despite the late hour, Robert insisted on returning to Timber Treasures. "The police will take care of it," Helen said, gently pulling at his arm. "We should just go back to our Airbnb. We're exhausted." "I need to see it again," Robert pressed, quickening his pace. "There might be something else there, something we missed." Helen sighed but followed, recognizing the stubborn set of his jaw. Most of the market stalls were already packed up for the night, vendors boxing up unsold goods. A few restaurants remained open, their warm lights inviting against the dimming sky. As they approached Timber Treasures, they saw the shopkeeper from earlier locking the front door. Upon noticing them, his posture stiffened, his movements growing hurried. "Look, someone else is coming out," Helen whispered, nodding toward a side door Robert hadn't seen before. A man stepped into the alley beside the store. He wore a leather jacket and a cowboy hat pulled low over his face. Yet even from afar there was something familiar about his profile. Robert narrowed his eyes, trying to place him. "He looks like the man in the photo," Robert murmured. "The one the detective showed us. Victor Manson." Helen frowned. "But the detective said he wouldn't be back for 2 days. Why would the shopkeeper lie to the police?" They watched as the man crossed the street toward a black sedan parked in front of a toy store. Another man stood by the car, and next to him was a little girl, 8 or 9 years old, with blonde pigtails. The man in the cowboy hat approached her first, crouching to her level. He reached out for an embrace, but the girl flinched back, turning her face away. When he ruffled her hair, she shivered. "Something's not right," Robert said, his protective instincts kicking in. "That girl's afraid of him." "We can't be sure of that, Robert," Helen replied cautiously. "It may be nothing. Kids often sulk, especially after being told they can't have a toy they wanted." Robert nodded, but the unease gnawed at him. The exchange had an odd underlying tension that sent chills down his spine. They watched as the three figures slid into the black sedan and drove away. Robert turned his gaze toward the shopkeeper, now swiftly striding down the street toward a bus stop. Without thinking, Robert jogged after him. "Excuse me!" he called out. The shopkeeper turned, his expression hardening when he recognized Robert. "What now? The police already took what they needed." "That man who just stepped out the side door," Robert said, catching his breath. "Was that Victor Manson, the owner?" The shopkeeper's eyes narrowed. "I don't have to answer your questions. If the police want to know something, they can ask me directly." "Just tell me if it was him," Robert pressed. The shopkeeper rolled his eyes. "God, you people just can't let it go, can you?" "No, that wasn't the boss. That was his brother. Now, if you're satisfied, leave me alone." With that, he stepped onto a bus that had just pulled in, ending the conversation. Helen caught up as the bus pulled away. "What did he say?" "He claims it was Manson's brother, not Manson himself," Robert said, brow furrowed. "But why wouldn't he tell the police his brother's here if the owner's out of town?" Helen shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "I don't know, Robert, but it's getting dark and we're both exhausted. Let's head back to the Airbnb and call Detective Marshall in the morning." Robert hesitated, torn between chasing the new lead and admitting Helen was right. At last he nodded, casting one final look at Timber Treasures before letting her lead him away. "Tomorrow," he promised himself, "tomorrow we'll get answers." Their Airbnb was a cozy second-floor apartment in a converted Victorian home, tucked in a quiet residential neighborhood just a few blocks from the market. The pale blue exterior and white gingerbread trim gave it a quaint, nostalgic charm that had caught Helen's eye when she booked it. As they approached the building, Helen touched Robert's arm. "I'm going to run over to that Chinese restaurant we passed on the corner. I could use some comfort food after today," Helen said. Robert nodded, slipping the apartment key from his pocket. "I'll wait here. A cigarette might help clear my head." Once Helen disappeared around the corner, Robert lowered himself onto the front steps and lit a cigarette. He drew in a deep breath, letting the smoke fill his lungs before releasing it into the darkening sky. The familiar ritual steadied him, giving his mind space to sort through the extraordinary events that had unraveled. Finding Emily's roller skates after all these years could not be a coincidence. They were a bridge, a tangible link to the daughter who had been gone for 2 decades. But what did it mean? How had they ended up in a thrift store in Oregon, thousands of miles from where she vanished? His hand trembled slightly as he took another drag. If the skates had made their way here, maybe Emily had too. And if that was true, then she was still alive. The thought both exhilarated and terrified him. For 20 years, he had lived in a suspended state of grief, unable to fully mourn a daughter who might still be somewhere out there. The skates had reignited a hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Robert pulled out his phone, searching for Victor Manson and Timber Treasures. Not much came up, just a sparse business website with a photo of the store's exterior and its hours, along with a few online reviews praising its eclectic selection. Nothing personal about Manson. As he scrolled, movement across the street caught his eye. A small figure partially hidden behind a lamppost scanning the buildings. Narrowing his gaze through the gathering dusk, Robert saw that it was a girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old. He stubbed out the cigarette and rose. "Hello?" he called softly. "Are you all right?" The girl hesitated, then took a cautious step forward. She was thin, with unkempt, dirty blonde hair tied into a messy ponytail, and wore clothes far too big for her small frame. "Are you looking for someone?" Robert asked gently, closing the distance. She met his eyes, wide, serious. "Please, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you help me save my sister? A bad man took her." Robert quickly scanned the street. Could this be some kind of setup, a distraction? But the block was quiet. No suspicious cars, no lurking figures. "What's your name?" he asked, crouching to her level. "Carla," she replied. "Please, I need help. No one believes me." "Who sent you here, Carla?" "No one sent me," she insisted. "I'm alone. I ran away from the orphanage to find my sister. I saw her today, but I was too scared to help her myself." Robert's mind raced. A runaway orphan, a kidnapped sister. The echoes of his own past were too sharp to ignore. "Where did you see your sister?" "At the market," Carla said. "With the man in the hat. She's afraid of him, but she has to pretend she's not." Robert froze. The little girl with the pigtails. The one who had flinched when that man touched her hair. "This man in the hat?" Robert asked carefully. "Is he tall, with thinning hair, wears a leather jacket?" Carla nodded urgently. "That's him. He took Jasmine from the orphanage. He said he adopted her, but it's not true. He's a bad man." Robert's mind raced. He thought of Emily, of the years stolen from him, of the answers that had eluded him for 2 decades. And now this young girl stood before him, facing the same looming tragedy. "Do you know where they took your sister?" Zrenya asked. Carla nodded. "I followed them before. I know where they go, but I can't get her out on my own." Robert's conscience wrestled with caution. This could be dangerous, possibly illegal. The sensible thing would be to call the police, let them handle it. But he knew too well the frustration of official channels, the slow grind of procedures while a child remained in danger. "Let me help you," he heard himself say. "Let me get my car." He sent a quick message to Helen. "Taking the car for a bit. Something came up. Using your key. Start dinner without me. I'll be back soon." As they climbed into the rental, Robert knew he might be making a terrible mistake. But he also knew he couldn't live with himself if he turned away from this plea for help, not after 20 years wishing someone had stepped in to save his own daughter. The rental hummed quietly as Robert followed Carla's directions, turning deeper into the residential streets of Fern Creek. Houses thinned. Streetlights became rare. "There," Carla said at last, pointing to a small trailer park hidden behind a cluster of trees. Robert eased the car into the entrance and cut the engine. In the dim light, he could make out a loose semicircle of RVs and trailers. At the far end sat a lone camper van, its windows glowing warm yellow. "That's it," Carla whispered. Robert hesitated, his hand resting on the door handle. "Carla, are you absolutely sure your sister's in there? This is very serious." She nodded, her eyes solemn. "Please, we have to help Jasmine." Against his better judgment, Robert stepped out. "Stay close to me," he told her. "And if anything feels wrong, we're leaving immediately, understood?" They approached the camper cautiously. No sound came from inside. No hint of how many might be within. Robert's heartbeat thudded in his chest as he raised his hand and knocked firmly. Seconds stretched into a minute, with no reply. He knocked again, harder this time. Finally, the door swung open. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the camper's interior lights. Robert recognized him, the other man from outside the toy store. Not the one in the cowboy hat, but the one who had been waiting beside the car. The man's eyes widened at the sight of Carla, then narrowed at Robert. "Who the hell are you? And what do you want, Zrenya?" "My name's Robert," he said evenly, forcing his voice to stay calm. "This girl came to me for help. She says her sister was brought here." The man's face darkened. "Name's Mike. And you've got it all wrong. No one's being held here against their will." He shot Carla a glare. "She's a troublemaker. Been stirring things up ever since her sister was adopted." "Adopted?" Robert repeated. Mike nodded. "That's right. Jasmine was legally adopted from Santa Catalina Orphanage by my boss. I'm just his assistant." "She," Mike said, jerking his thumb toward Carla, "couldn't accept it, and she's been making up wild stories ever since." "That's a lie! A lie!" Carla shouted, her small face twisted in anger. "You took her. You and that man. You took my sister." "What man?" "Swing?" Robert asked, though he already suspected the answer. "The girl was adopted by my boss," Mike explained with overstated patience. "Her brother came with me to pick her up, since my boss is out of town on business. Everything was done legally." Robert found himself torn between the plausibility of Mike's explanation and the raw conviction in Carla's voice. "Look," Robert said, trying for a reasonable tone, "I'm sure we can sort this out. Maybe I could talk to your boss or even see Jasmine for just a moment. If the sisters could say goodbye properly, maybe it would help everyone move forward." Mike's expression hardened. "That's not possible. Jasmine isn't here. She's already been taken to her new home in another car." As he spoke, Robert caught the faintest sound from inside the trailer. A soft, almost imperceptible hush, followed by what might have been a child's whisper. Mike's gaze flicked over his shoulder and back to Robert. "That's just my son," he said dismissively. "Listen, you'd better take this girl back to Santa Catalina before you get into trouble for endangering a minor. Whoever you are, you have no right to take her out of town without authorization." "I was only trying to help," Robert began. "Help? Really?" Mike mocked. "By abducting an orphan based on her wild tales, return her to the orphanage or next time I'll call the police." With that, he slammed the door in Robert's face. Robert stood there for a moment, sifting through the words in his head. The man's story sounded coherent, yet something about the whole situation didn't sit right. "He's lying," Carla insisted as they walked back to the car. "Jasmine's in there, I know it." "You heard him," Robert said quietly. "Your sister has been adopted. I know it's hard to accept, but—" "No!" Carla kicked at the dirt. "That's not true, please." "You have to believe me." Robert sighed, unsure what to do next. The sensible thing would be to return Carla to the orphanage, just as Mike had demanded. But a stubborn unease gnawed at him. "Let's get back to the car," he said at last. "We'll figure this out." Back in the driver's seat, Robert glanced at Carla. She sat slumped in the passenger chair, her small face set in a defiant frown. "Carla," he began softly, "I understand you're worried about your sister, but I have to take you back. I could get into serious trouble for keeping you with me." "Please don't take me back," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "Not without Jasmine. I promised I'd protect her." Robert's heart ached for the child. He remembered making a promise much like that to Emily long ago. That he'd always keep her safe, a promise he'd failed to keep. "How about this?" he suggested gently. We'll get some dinner, something nice, and then I'll take you back. I promise you won't be in trouble." Carla swiped at her eyes with her sleeve but stayed silent, a small, weary figure. Robert was about to start the engine when motion outside caught his eye. The caravan's headlights flared, casting a stark white beam into the trees. "They're leaving," he murmured, watching it roll slowly away from its spot. As Robert passed his parked car, he caught a glimpse through the side window. A woman with reddish-brown hair methodically closing the curtains of a caravan one by one. For just a fraction of a second, their eyes met through the glass. Emily. The name escaped his lips like a whisper. It couldn't be. And yet, there was something in her face, the shape, the set of her eyes, that struck him with unsettling familiarity. It was exactly how he'd imagined Emily might look as an adult. The same features he'd seen so often in those age progression photos over the years. Without thinking, Robert started the engine and eased onto the road, keeping a careful distance behind the caravan. "What are you doing?" asked Carla, sitting up straight. "I saw someone inside that van," Robert replied, his voice taut with emotion. "A woman. Who could be my daughter." "Your daughter?" Robert nodded, eyes locked on the taillights ahead. "My daughter Emily vanished 20 years ago when she was 12. Just like your sister. One moment she was safe, and then she was gone." As they drove, Robert's phone began to ring. Helen's name flashed on the screen. He pressed the speaker button. "Robert, where are you?" Helen's voice spilled into the car, tight with worry. "I've been waiting at the apartment." "Helen, you're not going to believe this," Robert said in a rush. "I think I just saw Emily. I'm following a caravan right now. There's a woman inside who looks exactly like her." "What?" "Robert, tell me exactly where you are." Her voice sharpened. "Are you sure it was her?" "I'm not sure of anything," he admitted. "But you know we always said Emily had one of those faces that wouldn't change much over time." "This woman. She's exactly how I imagined she'd look now." "Robert, please be careful," Helen pleaded. "You don't know who these people are, or what they're capable of. I have to follow this lead, Helen. I need to know." "At least tell me." Her voice cut off abruptly as the signal dropped, the road carrying them deeper into the rural outskirts beyond Fern Creek. For nearly an hour, they trailed the caravan along winding back roads, keeping far enough back to avoid attracting notice. Carla stayed silent, occasionally pointing out turns to help him stay on track. Finally, the van veered onto a gravel driveway leading to a large house set back from the road. Not quite a mansion, but sizable. A 2-story country-style home with a wraparound porch and a separate garage. Robert killed the headlights and stopped about 100 meters from the property, partly concealed by trees. From here, he could watch the house without being seen. "So, what now?" Carla whispered. "Why are we here?" Robert turned toward her, suddenly aware of how strange and perhaps frightening this must feel. "I'm sorry, Carla. I should have taken you back to the orphanage. But you're not the only one who's lost someone you love. My daughter Emily disappeared 20 years ago, and I think I just saw her in that caravan. That's why I followed it." Carla's eyes widened as understanding sank in. "You think the bad men took your daughter too?" "I don't know," Robert said quietly, "but I intend to find out." He turned his attention back to the house, watching as the caravan pulled up near the front steps. Mike stepped out first, followed by a woman holding a young girl's hand. It was unmistakably Jasmine, the girl from the toy store. "It's her," Carla whispered excitedly. "It's my sister." As the woman stepped into the warm glow of the porch light, Robert's breath caught in his throat. She was tall and graceful, with the same reddish-brown hair that Emily had inherited from Helen. Even from a distance, her movements evoked a painful reminder of his daughter. To his surprise, another figure emerged from the van, the man with the cowboy hat. But he wasn't wearing it now, and under the bright porch light, Robert recognized him instantly. The face from the DMV photo at the police station. It was Victor Manson. He lied. Robert murmured to himself. Mike had said Manson was out of town, yet here he was, with them all along. And the girl had been in the van the whole time. The realization hit him like a physical blow. If Manson had deceived them about his whereabouts, what else was he hiding? And if this woman was truly Emily, what horrors had she endured all these years? Robert's first impulse was to storm the house, confront Manson, and demand answers, but he forced himself to think clearly. He was outnumbered, possibly outgunned, and had a child with him. Caution was essential. He reached for his phone to call Detective Marshall, only to find no signal so far from the city. He was on his own, without backup or a plan. As he pondered his next move, a sharp knock on the driver's window made him jolt. Turning, he saw Mike's face pressed against the glass, his expression murderous. "Stay in the car," Robert instructed Carla in a low, urgent voice. "Lock the doors." He cracked the window just enough to speak. "Mike, I was just about to leave." "Bullshit," Mike snarled. "You followed us here. What are you, some kind of stalker?" Robert's mind raced for a way to diffuse the tension. The girl wanted to see her sister one last time. "I thought if we could just talk reasonably." "You're trespassing on private property," Mike cut in. "I don't know who you think you are, but you've crossed a line. Both of you need to come with me now." "I don't think that's a good idea," Robert replied, his hand hovering near the ignition. Mike's face darkened. "It wasn't a request. Either you come voluntarily or I radio the house and we handle this differently." He patted something under his jacket, the unmistakable shape of a gun. Robert's blood ran cold, but he knew he had to stay calm for Carla's sake. "All right," he said slowly, opening the door. We'll go talk. No need for things to get out of hand." As Carla reluctantly climbed out from the passenger side, Mike escorted them toward the house. Robert's eyes scanned the surroundings, noting the property layout, the number of vehicles, and possible escape routes. "You're making a big mistake," Mike warned as they neared the porch. "The boss isn't going to like this intrusion." "All I want is to understand what's happening here," Robert replied, resting a protective hand on Carla's shoulder. Before they reached the steps, the front door swung open, and Victor Manson himself stood there, his face a mask of cold fury. "Who are these people?" Zrenya demanded of Mike. "The man was guarding the house," Mike explained. "He's got the kid with him. Carla, her sister." Manson's eyes narrowed as he studied Robert. "And just who are you exactly?" "My name is Robert Whitmore," he replied, straightening his shoulders. "I believe you have something or someone that belongs to me." Before Manson could respond, the woman Robert had seen earlier appeared in the doorway behind him. She froze at the sight of Robert, her eyes widening in shock. At that moment, the distinct wail of sirens echoed in the distance. Mike cursed under his breath and pulled out a radio. "Boss, we've got company. Sounds like the police." Manson's face twisted with rage. "How did they find us? Did you bring them here?" he shouted at Robert. Robert shook his head. "My wife must have called them when I didn't come back. She knew I was following your van." The woman in the doorway kept staring at Robert, a whirlwind of emotions flickering across her face. Recognition, fear, hope, all in eyes that felt unmistakably familiar. "Lena, get inside," Manson ordered sharply. But the woman, Lena, didn't move, her gaze locked with Robert's. "Emily?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Emily Grace." Something shifted in her expression, a slight tremor running through her body at the sound of the name. The sirens grew louder and Manson's demeanor shifted from fury to cold calculation. "Mike, get everyone inside, bring them too," he said, nodding toward Robert and Carla. "We'll handle this my way." As they were herded into the house, Robert spotted Jasmine sitting on the couch in the living room. Her eyes wide with fear, Carla lunged toward her, but Mike held her back. The police sirens were now unmistakably close, and through the front window Robert could see flashing lights approaching the property. "Victor," Mike said urgently, "what's the plan?" Manson disappeared into another room and returned moments later with a gun. "Tell them we're armed and ready," he instructed. Robert's heart raced as the situation spiraled dangerously out of control. The woman, Emily or Lena, remained still by the fireplace, her face pale. In minutes, police cars had surrounded the property. A voice boomed through a loudspeaker, identifying itself as the Fern Creek Police Department and ordering everyone to exit the house with their hands up. "Nobody moves," Manson growled, positioning himself by the window. "Mike, bring the girl here." Mike grabbed Jasmine roughly by the arm and dragged her toward Manson. Carla screamed and surged forward, but Robert held her back, knowing any sudden move could trigger violence. "Let her go," Robert said firmly. "She's just a child. This is between us adults." Manson let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "You have no idea what you're involved in, Whitmore. You should have called the police at the park and handed the girl back, or stayed out of it." Outside, a voice came through the loudspeaker again. "Detective Marshall from the Fern Creek Police Department. The house is surrounded. Come out peacefully and no one will get hurt." Manson turned to the woman. "Lena, come here. Tell them everything's fine, that you're here willingly, and that the girl, Jasmine, is our newly adopted daughter." She hesitated, her eyes darting between Manson and Robert. "Now, Lena!" he barked. Slowly, she moved toward him, pausing midway across the room. "I can't do this anymore, Victor," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "What did you say?" Manson's face darkened ominously. "Och." "I said I can't do this anymore," she replied, her tone growing firmer and more resolute. She turned to Robert. You really are my father, aren't you?" Robert nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "Emily, we've never stopped searching for you." "Never." Manson raised his gun, warning. "Lena, I'm warning you, come here now." But Emily, as Robert now knew her to be, stood her ground. "No, Victor, it's over." In an instant, Manson aimed the weapon at Robert. "You've turned her against me." Everything blurred into chaos after that. Emily lunged at Manson as he fired. There was a fierce struggle, the deafening crack of gunshots ringing out, one then another. Robert cried out in horror, certain he was about to witness the death of his daughter or himself just moments after finding her. When the dust settled, it was Manson lying on the floor, blood spreading across his chest. Emily stood over him, a smaller gun trembling in her hands, while her own arm bled from a grazing wound. Without hesitation, Robert stepped in and kicked the weapons out of reach. Before Mike could react, the police burst through the front door, guns drawn. "Police, everyone down, hands where we can see them." Robert dropped to his knees, pulling Carla down with him. Mike was quickly subdued and handcuffed. Medical personnel rushed in, first attending to Manson, who was still alive despite his severe injury, then to Emily. Moments later, another team arrived to care for the two girls, securing and gently examining them. As the paramedics bandaged Emily's arm, Robert watched from a short distance, hardly daring to believe that after 20 years, he was in the same room as his daughter. The hospital hallway hummed with activity as medical staff moved efficiently between rooms. Robert sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair outside the treatment room where doctors were tending to Emily's gunshot wound. He could scarcely believe that after 2 decades of relentless searching and unwavering hope, his daughter was alive and just beyond that door. Detective Marshall approached, his expression grave yet kind. "Mr. Whitmore, the doctors say your daughter's injury is relatively minor. The bullet grazed her upper arm. It'll need stitches but no surgery." Robert nodded, relief washing over him. "And Manson? He's in surgery," the detective replied. The bullet hit his chest but missed his heart. They're working to stabilize him now. What about the girls, Carla and Jasmine? They're with Child Protective Services in the pediatric wing, physically unharmed but understandably shaken. Robert rubbed his face, the events of the day catching up to him. Helen had arrived at the hospital an hour earlier, frantic with worry after calling the police when Robert didn't return or answer his phone. The authorities had tracked the rental car's GPS to Manson's property. Now she was in the cafeteria grabbing coffee for them both. The treatment room door opened and a doctor emerged. "Mr. Whitmore, you can see your daughter now. We finished the stitches and she's resting comfortably." Robert's heart raced as he stepped into the hospital room. Emily lay in the bed, her arm wrapped in bandages, her face pale yet serene. She lifted her gaze as he drew near, her green eyes mirrors of Helen's, studying him with a blend of uncertainty and hope. "Emily," he whispered, pausing at the foot of the bed, hesitant to approach too quickly and startle her. "Dad," she replied, her voice cracking on the word. "It's really you." That single word shattered something deep inside Robert. Tears he had suppressed for hours spilled down his cheeks as he moved to her side, gently taking her unharmed hand in his. "I never stopped searching for you," he said softly. "Not for a single day." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. "I thought you were gone. Victor told me that. He said no one was looking anymore, that you and Mom had died in a car accident." The door opened again and Helen entered, freezing at the sight of her daughter. "Emily?" The coffee cups in her hands trembled and nearly slipped. "Mom?" Emily's voice was small, almost childlike. Helen set the cups down with shaking hands and hurried to the bed, embracing her daughter carefully around the injured arm. The three of them held on tightly, 20 years of separation dissolving in a rush of tears and unfinished words. Eventually, Detective Marshall knocked gently and stepped inside. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I need to take your statement, Miss Whitmore. Or would you prefer another name?" Emily sat up straighter, wiping her eyes. "My name is Emily Grace Whitmore," she replied firmly. "He called me Lena, but that was never my real name." For the next hour, Emily shared her harrowing story, her voice steady despite the pain it evoked. She described how Victor Manson, a trucker at the time, had kidnapped her while she was skating to a friend's house. He said there'd been a robbery nearby, that it wasn't safe, she explained. "When I refused to go with him, he grabbed me and pressed a chemical-soaked cloth over my face. I woke up in his truck hundreds of miles away." She went on to detail how Manson had kept her hidden, constantly moving between states and using back roads to evade checkpoints. "Sometimes he stashed me in a hidden compartment in his truck. He never stayed in one place long, except for Fern Creek. We returned here about once a month when he checked on his business." "The pawn shop?" Detective Marshall asked, jotting notes. Emily nodded. "Timber Treasures. It was his main hub in a way. He has other identities and businesses in different towns. He deals in stolen goods, among other things." "Why didn't you try to escape?" Helen asked gently. "Especially as you got older?" Emily's eyes dropped. "I did at first, but each time he caught me, the punishments grew worse. He convinced me that no one was searching anymore, that you both were dead. Eventually, I stopped trying. It was easier to survive by going along with it." "When did he start calling you his wife?" Detective Marshall inquired. "When I turned 18, Emily answered, her voice hollow. "That's when he began taking me to meet his associates, introducing me as Lena, his quiet, shy wife. But he still kept me isolated most of the time." Detective Marshall's expression darkened as he wrote in his notebook. "Emily, do you know why Victor adopted Jasmine from the orphanage? Was it a legal adoption?" Emily's expression darkened. With her good hand, she clutched the bedsheet. I don't know all the details, but she hesitated as if struggling to find the words. A few months ago, I overheard Victor talking to Mike. He said I was getting older and he wanted. Her voice faltered. Robert gently placed his hand over hers, offering silent support. Emily drew in a deep breath and went on. He said he wanted a new girl, someone young. He told Mike he was looking for a second wife, said he'd still keep me but wanted what he called a fresh blossom. Disgust and pain flickered across her face as she spoke. Helen brought a trembling hand to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. They searched for a while, Emily continued. Then they found Jasmine at the orphanage. I don't know how he arranged the adoption, but it couldn't have been legal. Victor has always preferred to do things off the books. He's involved in all kinds of shady trades and deals. He changes his identity depending on the town he's in. It's paranoid to the core. Detective Marshall's jaw tightened. We'll be conducting a full investigation with the orphanage and reviewing the records at Timber Treasures. If there was any bribery or corruption involved, we'll uncover it. What's going to happen to Victor? Robert asked, his voice taut with controlled fury. He'll face charges for your abduction, the detective replied, nodding toward Emily. Illegal imprisonment, child endangerment in Jasmine's case, weapons charges, and attempted murder. And that's just the start. Once we dig into his other dealings, there will likely be more. Robert's expression hardened, but there was satisfaction in his eyes. The man who had stolen his daughter's life would not escape justice. A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse stepped in, followed by a CPS worker in uniform escorting Carla and Jasmine. The girls wanted to see you, the CPS worker explained. They've been asking since they arrived. Carla hurried forward, stopping just short of the bed. Are you okay, Emily? Did the bad man hurt you a lot? Emily gave her a soft smile. I'll be fine. Just a scratch. How are you and Jasmine? Half hidden behind her sister, Jasmine looked up with wide eyes. Are we going back to the orphanage? She asked quietly. Before the CPS worker could answer, Robert spoke up. Actually, I wanted to discuss that. I know we can't adopt them right now. We live out of state and there's a lot of paperwork and home inspections involved. But I'd like to help arrange for them to be placed in a better facility. And I want to provide financial support for their care and education. Emily reached out with her good hand toward Carla. You saved me, you know. If you hadn't been brave enough to go looking for help, I might never have found my family. Carla's smile was proud. You saved my sister, too. The CPS worker gave an approving nod. We'll certainly discuss placement options for the girls, and financial assistance would be greatly appreciated. As night fell, the hospital room buzzed with activity. Doctors came to check on Emily. Police officers arrived with updates on the investigation. Helen made call after call to relatives back home, sharing the miraculous news. Victor Manson had survived surgery, but remained in critical condition. Mike and 3 other men tied to Manson's operation had been arrested, and in custody they began to talk, unraveling a web of illegal dealings that stretched across more than a dozen states. When the room finally fell silent, Robert found himself sitting beside Emily's bed, watching her sleep. Her face, so familiar yet touched by the passing years, looked peaceful, perhaps for the first time in decades. On the opposite side sat Helen, her hand resting gently on Emily's uninjured arm. 20 years, Helen whispered. I never thought we'd see this day. Thank you for making me take this trip. Robert murmured, his voice so low it was barely more than a breath past the tightness in his throat. After all the searching, the false leads, the crushing disappointments, Emily had been found, and it had started with nothing more than a pair of roller skates in a dusty thrift store window, and the courage of a little girl who refused to give up on her sister. Life had stolen so much from them. 20 years of birthdays and holidays, of ordinary days and once-in-a-lifetime moments they could never reclaim. Yet as Robert sat there, listening to his daughter's steady breathing, he knew that what truly mattered wasn't what had been lost, but what had been found. The darkness that had shrouded their lives for 2 decades was finally lifting. The road ahead would not be smooth. Emily would need time and care to heal from her trauma, and they would all have to learn how to be a family again. But for the first time in 20 years, they would walk that road together. Outside the hospital window, the first stars began pricking the night sky. Robert remembered how Emily used to love stargazing as a child, how she would make a wish on the first star she spotted. Tonight, for the first time in 20 years, there was no wish to make. The miracle he had prayed for all those years was lying right in front of him, sleeping peacefully, finally home where she belonged.